There's a season for everything, a time for every matter under the heavens, a time for giving birth and a time for dying, a time for planting and a time for uprooting what was planted, a time for killing and a time for healing, a time for tearing down and a time for building up, a time for crying and a time for laughing, a time for mourning and a time for dancing, a time for throwing stones and a time for gathering stones, a time for embracing and a time for avoiding embracing, a time for searching and a time for losing, a time for keeping and a time for throwing away, a time for tearing and a time for repairing, a time for keeping silent and a time for speaking, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for war and a time for peace. I'm reminded of this passage from Ecclesiastes 3 during this season, especially as I walk through this park. I've been walking through this park with my family right in northwest Philly since the beginning of the pandemic, and we've seen the park transform over the seasons. We started in the spring and the trees were just bare there in the middle of March, and then we saw them blossoming and we saw them flowering, and then as the weather heated up, those blossoms turned to leaves and the whole area turned green. And then by the time we got to September and October, the weather cooled down and the fall started and the leaves started changing again and the scenery changed. And even as we were suspended and stuck in this pandemic, we saw time going on and the seasons passing through. Even though it felt like no time had passed, that 1 hour was 100 days. The nature and the creation around us still changed, still moved, still went through seasons. And so this passage from Ecclesiastes, this really timeless passage, has new meaning now because we know that the seasons pass and that the times pass, and that even this time will pass too. And so I encourage you, and my encouragement to you as we're almost 7 months into this pandemic, wearing masks and the whole thing, that this will pass. I'm not sure when, not sure how in some ways, but it will. And whatever trouble you're facing today, I believe it will pass too. Whether it means you get through it in a new way, whether it means that you see it in a new way, it will pass. And because there are seasons for everything, we know that our circumstances are not permanent and that we'll get through all the trouble that's before us. All the political turmoil, all the difficulty, all the pain that you're feeling now, the separation, the disparate nature of this time, it will pass. And because we know these things are temporary, we can hold on to what isn't. We can hold on to the faithfulness of God, the love of God, which endures forever. May you rest in that peace today, and may you find opportunities to rest in that peace. On Sunday, Ben's one of our pastors, and he was telling us about how we can have holy pauses, even in the most difficult of circumstances, to see if they can't change us, and maybe they can even change our circumstance. I don't know if a holy pause today will end this pandemic, but it might change how you see it. And it might allow you to hold on to the permanent, faithful things, even in a season of difficulty. And that endurance may allow you to wait through this season, knowing that it will pass. And also observe around you the creation as it continues to move through its seasons, regardless of the pandemic, regardless of who is president. God is continuing to move with us. May we follow God and God's Spirit in these changing seasons, knowing that there is a time for everything, and this is one of those times. I hope this message brings you peace and comfort in the ability to wait for this season to pass, and the ability to endure because you know that it will. Peace to you.